Good morning again. Hi, everybody. I hope you've found the first couple of sessions useful. I'm just here now. I'm the regional manager for London and South East. My name is Jennifer Castle. Hopefully you saw me do the introduction this morning. And it's with great pleasure that I'm going to introduce Noel Shearer today, who joins us, I believe, I don't know if he's going to show his video, I think from a narrowboat in Cheshire, which is novel, which is great, flexible working and all that. So when looking at our key speakers this year, it was clear to me that CCS should be part of the conference. You may say that on the surface, you might see us as competitors, but both as government organisations that directly serve the public sector. We've had many conversations about seeing strength in shared learning and partnerships. And it is with delight, genuine delight, that I can introduce Noel to talk about some of the great work that they've been doing. Noel Shearer is the head of construction category for Crown Commercial Service and leads a team delivering the 30 billion 7-year construction works and associated frameworks. And, you know, although it pains me to say this is the largest construction framework ever to be procured in the UK and has been designed from the ground up to support collaborative delivery of government construction policy and an alliancing approach to construction procurement. Noel himself is a chartered quantity surveyor with over 35 years experience delivering construction projects across multiple sectors, a fellow of RICS and an ICE accredited NEC project manager. I'm going to hand over to Noel and keep quiet. All good, Noel?
Thank you, Jennifer. So yeah, as Jennifer says, I am currently on a narrowboat in Cheshire, which is a really nice working location, but the commute takes a long time compared to doing a car. So no, I'm just moored up for the winter and just using the boat as an office. So I'm just going to share my screen. If we can just check that works okay first. So yeah, thank you very much for that introduction, Jennifer, and I wholly support what you say. On the face of it, you look at us as competitors, but we're operating in very different and complementary environments, and both with the hallmark of trying to drive construction for the public good, really. So just as an agenda of what I want to cover, so I want to put CCS in context. Some of you might not have heard of us, but I think it's important to understand how construction fits into CCS as a context, because it's a new area for us. We've been around the periphery of construction for quite a long time, but actual construction works is a new area for us. And so the second point there, I wanted to look at why we've done that, what the drivers are that cause CCS as a strategy to enter such a high profile area, and in a big way as well. And then importantly, the way that we've chosen to do that, and I'll explain why we've chosen it, is via an alliancing process and an alliancing structure. And I wanted to talk about our approach to that and how that's helping us and helping the industry. And then I've got some examples of how our framework is supporting work being done by other organisations. And then hopefully we've got some time for questions as well. So if you could hold your questions till the end, and please feel free to use the chat function. And then I think Jennifer's going to moderate those and pick out any common questions first, etc. So hopefully that will hit the mark and give you something of interest to take away. So to put Crown Commercial into some context, if you're not familiar with us, we're the biggest public procurement organisation in the UK. We, as the slide says there, use our commercial expertise to help public sector save money and buying common goods, works and services. Importantly for me, I'm not going to read all the bullet points there, you can read those, but importantly for me, related to the construction framework, we aren't just a commercial organisation. Over the last couple of years, in terms of the construction sphere, CCS have invested heavily in technical expertise as well as commercial and procurement expertise, and that's allowing us to provide a sort of a more consultancy-based service than probably traditionally CCS have been involved in it in the more traditional procurements that we've done. hence as Jennifer said in the introduction, my background is very, very firmly in delivery of construction contracts, and what I like to think I bring to the project with my team is that we can advise very closely on strategy and driving the maximum benefit from use of the framework. CCS are an executive branch of the Cabinet Office. As such, we're a not-for-profit organisation. We aren't targeted to make any sort of profit. We don't want to make any profit, because what that would mean is that we were charging our levies too high, and money that is being charged as a levy would find its way back into the treasury, so into the public purse, but it would have ultimately come from our clients. So we set our levies as low as we feasibly can so that we don't make a profit. And really importantly, in terms of the construction framework, we're there to, one of our primary objectives is to drive industry improvement. That's one of the primary reasons we entered this market, and I'll explain why that is in a minute. So in terms of the construction team, I sit with my team in what we call the buildings pillar, and we have 3 categories in there: energy, workplace, so facilities management, hard and soft facilities management, and then the construction category. And with those 3 categories and there's various subcategories in there, what that's meant is we can now pursue our sort of ultimate objective of being able to support public sector clients through all aspects of the building life cycle. So if you're familiar with the RIBA stages, the work stage of a project, we can now address all of those stages right through from the germ of an idea, through design, through delivery of the project, operation, maintenance of that, and ultimately through disposal through our estate services as well, and demolition frameworks. So for the very first time for the last year, we've actually been able to operate that whole life cycle objective. And in terms of the construction team, we have 4 subcategories. So as on the slide there, consultancy services. So you might be familiar with our snappily titled PMF DTS framework, the project management of full design team services. Building materials and equipment is an area that's become increasingly important for us as we move into agendas to try and standardize and to ensure safety of building materials post-Grenfell. Modular building solutions, and again, that's in the ascendancy due to off-site manufacture. And then the subcategory that I look after, the construction works subcategory. And importantly, we wrap all of those 4 subcategories together by taking an alliance approach to those. And what we've built in the facility to do is to link the delivery of projects using call-off from one or more of those projects. And I'll explain how we do that as we go through. So, as I mentioned at the outset, excuse me, construction works is a new area for us. For a long time, people have talked about a government framework for this. And it was, if I'm honest, my impression is, I'm fairly new to government, but my impression is it was put away in the too hard box every few years. And it's probably to do with the scale and the diversity of what we deliver in government, that it became really hard to do. When you look at why we changed that, well, we've got a long track record. So 25 years ago, the Channel Tunnel was opened. Seems like only yesterday. And the same year, there was, if you're familiar with the construction industry, the Latham report, Constructing the Team, was published. And the quote from it there, best solution to avoid disputes, and talks about adopting teamwork and partnership arrangements to solve disputes, etc. And lots of effort has gone in to try and deliver that type of approach, but with varying degrees of success. So 25 years ago, 1994. Google, I was really surprised with this. I was trying to find what happened in 1998, and Google was created in 1998. And it's like obviously a root and branch part of our day-to-day life now, but is actually 21 years old. 1998, Rethinking Construction, the Egan report, And that really did start to pave the way for the sort of approaches that we're embedding in our frameworks now. So, quote there, the task force recommends government commits itself to leading public sector bodies towards becoming best practice clients. I don't think we always are that. We certainly aren't in central government, but we're trying to improve that. We believe this process must begin with substantial improvements in the way we procure construction, and I think both us and LHC are building those methodologies. And the concept of the alliance is fundamental to our view of how that can be achieved. So 21 years ago, and to our knowledge, we haven't really adopted this alliancing approach to any structured degree. They're the sort of long-term policies that have been around. In terms of current policies that are driving what we've done, so the key ones probably over the last few years, the industrial strategy and construction sector deal, you might know it as Construction 2025, the general construction strategy and transforming infrastructure performance. And they were our baselines, if you like, when we were looking at our strategy for developing this framework. And there were some really key themes that come right the way through those as a kind of golden thread through all those various strategy and policy documents. And I've listed them there. They're the primary ones that we tried to make sure we embedded in our framework. So making us better clients, fair payment, supply chain resilience for obvious reasons. Lots of talk about likes of BIM and applying technology to improve efficiency and productivity. Reducing commercial friction. I'm a QS. That's in my DNA to try and embody improvements in commercial arrangements. Encouraging the growth of SMEs, benchmarking, delivering social value, modern slavery, and net zero carbon are really high up the agenda now in terms of policy, both in central government and in wider public sector as well. So we recognise that they were the primary policy drivers that appeared in all of those documents, and we have built those either built them in as mandatory requirements or built them in as requirements that all of our suppliers have signed up to supporting in our framework. And then in terms of some social and environmental drivers, well, I mean, tragically, the Grenfell Tower fire a couple of years ago, it became obvious to us, that was at the outset of when we were starting to develop our strategy, and it became obvious to us that we were going to have a structure that allowed us to drive industry change for the recommendations that would undoubtedly come out of that tragedy, and obviously that is happening, and we are heavily involved in that now. Shortly after that, Carillion's collapse, widely predicted, but it was surprising to a lot in government how difficult it was to establish the wholesale impact of the Carillion collapse, and it was one of the drivers that we looked at in terms of how the scale really of what we set as an aspiration for the framework. The logic being that the more that we could have visibility of in central government, the more that we could help to avoid situations like Carillion. And then this wasn't a driver, but ultimately it's proven to be very beneficial to us, is that the arrival of COVID-19 earlier this year has highlighted to us the benefits of the alliancing structures that we've built as a response to the various social and environmental drivers. So it's allowed us to work really closely with the industry at really intense pace to drive the response to COVID, and it's been a really nice proving ground for in the early days of our framework for what we're doing. In terms of delivery, coming down to the bare bones of what we do, we recognised that we needed to have a very flexible call-off arrangement. So if we were building a framework that was applicable across such a wide variety of clients, project types, and departments, we needed to have the flexibility. So although certainly in government, NEC is the most commonly used contract, I've said about 95% there. I think actually by value, it's probably a lot higher than that. excuse me, but we recognised that potential users were also very heavily aligned still around JTT contracts and also around PPC 2000 contracts, if you're familiar with that. There are a few departments in government that have very successfully aligned themselves to that contract and wanted to have the flexibility to continue to do that. We recognised that we needed to not be a framework that was prescriptive in the way that you ran your procurements, but that we needed to support all of the normal procurement routes and strategies that you might want to use. So we had some examples in government where we had, for example, frameworks that were based around a very traditional approach, albeit using NEC contracts, etc., but that users were trying to shoehorn design and build and two-stage arrangements into them, and it was just a recipe for dispute and disaster. So we needed to ensure that we could deliver all of those common procurement routes. So as well as delivering traditional single-stage lump sum type arrangements, we've built in the flexibility so you can have early contractor involvement, two-stage arrangements, target costs, etc. And design can be covered in terms of employer or contractor design. We haven't come across a proposed procurement arrangement yet that we haven't been able to support. And taking all of those drivers, the political policy drivers, environmental, and the delivery drivers into account, when we looked at the model that we were going to use, we recognized that if we were going to achieve the sort of industry change that was our aspiration, and to actually try and drive the sort of proposals that had come out of the EGAN and the Latham report and general industry good best practice since then, that the best chance we had of achieving that was to structure the framework on an alliance model so that we could work really very closely with not just the contractors but also with the client side as well, and bring those two bodies together to actually drive beneficial improvement that was mutually beneficial to both sides. So our approach has been just graphically there. So we built our framework around a standard document called FAC1, which is the Framework Alliance Contract. It belongs to the same suite as PPC 2000 and TAC1, published by the Association of Consulting Architects. And it's a standard framework alliance contract, which embeds good practice within it. Aligned to that, we then tagged on our framework, our specific framework management requirements. So, for example, that explains how call-offs are done, how what key performance indicators we use, etc. And then the call-off arrangements that are built into that state that you can use any of the standard suites of contracts. So that would include NEC 3 and 4 and the various different options. It includes, for example, things like the NEC 4 alliancing contract as well as the PSC contract. And then the JCT families of contracts. So all of the various contracts for example, through the standard minor works intermediate into design and build, and also things that the less used ones like constructing excellence contract, and also the suite of contracts that is aligned to those but set up for Scotland, so the SBCC contracts. And then also, as I mentioned before, PPC 2000 as a call-off route, which is a multi-party contract, and also the TAC one-term alliance contract, both heavily focused around alliancing type processes. So you can use any one of those contracts as a call-off to get that flexibility of approach. And then sitting underneath that is a series of standard boilerplate amendments that were delivered for to provide a consistent approach to working with government, but also various public sector organisations are finding they're a good basis to use as their own bespoke amendments. So they cover things like dealing with intellectual property, GDPR security, freedom of information requests, those types of things that are probably a bit more specific to public sector than the standard contracts can deal with. And then, very importantly, we recognise that as individual clients running individual projects, you have your own specific, either specific delivery requirements to fit in with your governance, or specific project requirements to fit in with the specific risk profile that's associated with your project. So there's no restriction on the Z clauses or contract amendments that you can adopt there. So at its simplest, you can call it from the contract using a standard contract, and you can embed your standard Z clauses below that, and you're good to go. In terms of the guidance that we produce in terms of best practice, we always promote that you should amend the contract to the least possible to deliver the risk mitigation that you need to do. So we try and encourage best practice in everything we're doing. Excuse me. So how do we drive collaboration and innovation? Well, I mentioned that the FAC1 contract forms the bedrock there of the alliancing process. The right-hand side of the slide there is an illustration of the lotting structure there. I won't go into it because I'm not trying to sell the framework to you, just how we use it. But there are 12 individual lots there, then organised into geographical sublots, some of them. And each one of those is established as a separate legal alliance. So all of the, if I pick an example there, all of the contractors in Lot 8 at the bottom left there, which covers maritime works, all sign up to a common alliance contract. And any clients that join our framework that want to call off from Lot 8 also sign up to that common contract, that common alliance contract. So in the illustration on the left there, each of those alliances is a cluster of all of the contractors that are on the lot and all of the clients that use that lot. So obviously the body of clients grows over time. And that sounds more complex than it is. When a client joins our framework, what they actually do is they just sign up on a single sheet of paper, and they just there's a series of tick boxes that just says, yeah, I might in the future use lots 1, 3, 7, 9, and 11. So I'll just tick to join those now, and then it's not binding, but it just gives them access to use those lots. The reason for forming a separate alliance around each lot is that we take then a collaborative approach to, as it says at the top there, the specific objectives, risks, success factors particular to that market sector. And it allows us to manage the market sector in the way that's most specific to that sector. So as an example, Lot 7 is our high-rise accommodation works lot. It was included specifically because we recognise we would probably need to work with the industry in that lot to deliver and advise on the outcome from Grenfell. But we would probably want to manage that sector anyway in a very different way from we might want to manage, for example, the demolitioning and decommissioning market, or the maritime works market sector, for example. So it gives us that flexibility to work with suppliers in different ways. And we see ourselves, CCS, as very much the intermediary between those specific contractor groupings and the client user groups that are associated with them in terms of guiding and giving feedback and continuous improvement. Just to give you an example of how that works, it just is the best example at the moment in terms of Grenfell. So Dame Judith Hackett did her original report on the need to improve industry to address the shortcomings of the industry that led to the Grenfell tragedy. And we agreed with Judith Hackett that we would organise a workshop with our Lot 7 contractors, our high-rise contractors. So we've got a group of 12 suppliers there that are experienced in that field. We also brought in our construction management lot, so a group of organisations that are used to managing construction in those areas. And then we also brought in client user group representations, so MHCLG along with a couple of other user groups. And we spent a day just workshopping the proposals, the initial proposals coming out from the Hackett report, and specifically trying to identify what the blockers to delivery of those would be in terms of actually delivering that on the ground. That really resonated with me because my role in this framework was initially as a consultant, as a QS, having delivered projects for all of my working life, to come in and actually say, how is this framework going to work on the ground? How is it going to deliver projects? How are we going to make sure it's not just a procurement vehicle that then leaves people floundering and not able to actually benefit from it? So that group fed back their findings into we facilitated it and acted as that role in the middle. And we fed back the findings into the industry safety steering group that Judith Hackett chairs. And they were acted on and incorporated in the next iteration. And we've actually had some really pleasing sort of public recognition from Judith Hackett as being an organisation that's kind of thought leading in that area. So really nice to see that recognised. But it equally for me, it was really nice to see that as a very graphic illustration of what we set out to achieve. And we're starting to do that in other areas as well now. So one of the areas that we never envisaged we would be doing when we set out, so we launched the framework, I should have said really, in January this year. Just to give you an indication quickly of where we are at the moment, we have currently got 102 clients registered since January, and we've got, I think it's 79 projects that are at various points going through the life cycle. The current pipeline of work is just over 2.5 billion, and the smallest value contract on that pipeline is, I think, just over 100,000 as a demolition project that was urgently required to regain program loss. And the largest project on there is just under 300 million, which is the urban regeneration project going on around the Birmingham International Station development. So a very widely ranging series of projects and values there. In terms of working with the industry, as I said, we didn't think we would be doing this, but when the COVID crisis hit, and particularly when lockdown started and the furlough scheme and everything, because we're acting at the centre of government, as I mentioned, we're an executive agency of the Cabinet Office, and we got very heavily drawn into supporting the response from government there. And so some examples of what we were doing, probably a lot of you will be familiar with the policy note PPN 220 that came out, which was all about providing guidance and mechanisms on supporting suppliers through that initial crisis stage, really trying to ensure that as we came out of lockdown, there was still a viable industry that could start up again. And so we were working very heavily with that. PPN 220 was issued. We were on the steering body that produced the construction specific response to that. So there was ultimately, a couple of weeks later, there was a set of construction model clauses that were issued and a set of guidance notes that provided some support on how to actually implement that. And then we also, CCS actually led this piece of work, which we set up a cross-government forum covering all of the different departments and the construction, commercial construction people in those departments, looking at a coordinated response to the construction issues that were coming out of COVID. So we produced a best practice manual in how you could respond to those. So some of those were contractual responses and trying to apply fair and balanced responses to contractual issues, and others were how can we provide non-contractual responses, if you like, to support the industry through that. So things like spreading best practice in how to drive forward agreement of issues and whatnot, as well as some sort of non-contractual issues about how to free up cash flow. So we were really heavily involved in that. That forum actually is still going, and we're now trying to divert our focus onto Brexit and trying to be a little bit more forward-looking rather than backward-looking on that. But I think it was really useful to us that we had the Construction Leadership Council working right through the COVID initial response, meeting daily. For those of you that aren't aware, Construction Leadership Council is very much driven by the industry. So it's got the likes of Build UK, Seeker in there, the construction suppliers, material suppliers bodies, as well as the likes of BEIS and IPA are in there with a voice. And what that meant was the proposals that were coming out of the CLC pretty much were rubber stamped as they came out, because they'd already been through that sort of the iteration of going through government approval. So things like the standard operating procedures, the safe operating procedures that were published at various points had already had sort of BEIS and IPA input, and we were feeding into all of that process. But I think it was really helpful when the roadmap was published. So for those of you that haven't seen this, it's a really good document, actually. This is just one table from it, but it does set out that there's this three-phased approach to recovery through COVID. So I'm just checking I'm all right for time. And we're working within that framework to try and, we've gone through the initial restart. We're now looking at how best we can reset, and then ultimately we're looking to transform the industry and support the CLC roadmap. And the way we're doing that in the framework, driving collaboration and innovation through, we set up a series of alliance focus groups, and these are just kicking off at the moment. As I say, we only started this year, but they're the areas that we're looking at, bringing contractors and clients together to find mutually beneficial ways to drive these areas forward. So things like COVID recovery is a given, but also things like social value, SME and modern methods of construction. How do we actually drive that? And if there's industry benefit that comes out of that, as well as framework benefit, that's really great. They're the sort of solutions we're trying to find. In terms of supply chain integration, we built in to the framework model, not just that the framework's managed on an alliancing structure, but if you take a typical program structure here, you might have a number of projects there, something like a housing project, a factory, say, in the same area, and a district heating system, as well as design as key material providers. Then we built in the capability in the framework to operate what we call a sub-alliance and to put a wrapper around that. And you do that by using the FAC1 contract again, but you can take a program level approach to driving the contracts against program objectives rather than project objectives in terms of those areas I've listed on the left there. So just finally, just pick up a couple of examples of where we're fully aligned with the industry and what we're trying to do pushing forward. So the best example probably is Project 13, if you're familiar with that the ICE have promoted heavily as their way of promoting industry improvement for the next decade, really. When you look at the commercial handbook for Project 13, it promotes two contracting options. And the first is where everybody signs up to a multi-party contract. The way we support that through the framework, if I just reflect on that structure that I showed you a few slides ago, there are a number of different alliance type multi-party contracts in there that can be used as call-offs. So the NEC4 alliance contract, the JCT constructing excellence contract, PPC 2000 and TAC1 are all those types of multi-party arrangements where everyone signs up to a common agreement with common goals and ambitions and shared rewards. And then the second model that Project 13 uses is a kind of a side agreement that reinforces the alliancing nature and sets out mechanisms to feed back into the core contract. So the way we promote that in our framework is that example I've just given you, where we use the FAC1 alliance contract as a standard, and we wrap that around the various different contract arrangements. So there's some good examples of that being used at the moment by the likes of the Ministry of Justice, where they're looking at their prisons program as a holistic program of works, but also bringing key supply chain members into that alliance so that they're securing market supply, for example, there. I'm going to skip this slide because it doesn't really add very much. I think I've run out of time. So I hope that's helped you to understand how we're trying to support the industry moving forward through COVID and beyond, I'm more than happy to take some questions if anybody's got anything that they want to expand on.
Great, thank you very much, Noel. That was really interesting, and definitely supported by LHC, the collaborative approach to try and get the best value and best outcomes. So no questions have come through just yet. Just going to give people a couple of minutes just to mull it over, see if there's something that they do want to ask. I do have a question around the notion of collaboration. And first of all, like, I know that you've got some focus groups and some practice groups and people talking about best practice here. But when it comes to actually in practice, what's the appetite for the clients to be sharing, you know, what their perceived objectives are and the perceived risks are, and sharing that with other clients to see whether they can drive better outcomes? Are people eager to do it?
So that's probably the less common approach that we're hearing. So we definitely are hearing some of that. So we're working with some clients where they're looking at maybe working with adjacent two local authorities, for example, working together to deliver a scheme of work and get some benefits out of that. We have had some initial soundings about, for example, the Ministry of Defence are building a school on one of their bases, and working with the adjoining local authority to see whether there's any sort of synergies they can get there in terms of looking at that as a programme. So, but I've got to say they're at early stages, and there's quite a lot of hurdles to overcome in that, I think.
How about your supply chain?
Well, I was just going to say we're seeing it come a lot more from the supply chain. So we've actually got contractors that are wanting to come to us to set up alliances with other contractors in the lot to try and deliver programs of work. And specifically, that's happening, I think, as we come out of COVID, where people are recognizing that the industry is being used to drive recovery, and actually market capacity is really looking like it could be quite constrained, especially in the higher value projects. So it's interesting that we've got a lot of clients looking at using alliancing for that.
Yeah.
But we've also got a lot of the suppliers starting to talk about, hang on a minute, if we took a bigger picture view of this, actually we could probably work together to deliver this rather than in competition.
Yeah, I think I agree with you there. It's something that we at LHC have been pushing quite a lot, particularly when it comes to offsite construction. You know, if we can get some collaborative clusters going, the capacity is much more manageable and easier to feed through to the supply. But it is a challenge. It's not easy. We don't have the answers. We have a couple of questions here. I do have one that's come through saying that the defence is a large sector which seems to have many of its own contractual requirements, DEFCONs. Do you envisage them joining your, I was about to say our philosophy because it's the same, but your philosophy?
Absolutely. So the Defence Infrastructure Organisation were, so they deliver infrastructure on behalf of MOD. They were, I've got to say, probably our key stakeholder when we were developing the strategy for it, as well as the Ministry of Justice, recognising that they both had very, very large programmes of work and that we needed a critical mass to be able to achieve the aspirations that we had for the framework. So both of those organisations worked with us in terms of they committed to, if our framework was fit for purpose for what they needed, they wouldn't renew their existing capital works frameworks. So so we're working very closely with both of them at the moment. So the MOD, I mentioned that we have a set of boilerplate amendments. So the boilerplate amendments is the vehicle that allows DEFCONs to be incorporated, so the defence specific contract amendments. But more importantly, they're making some big moves into moving away from the very sort of traditional based procurements that they do. And we're actually working with them on a couple of program level alliances at the moment that we're looking at putting into place. MOJ are way ahead of the pack, I've got to say. So they're looking at, on their prisons program, they're looking at using alliancing for exactly what you've just talked about, trying to secure supply chain. So their proposed model at the moment is to bring together 4 prisons, 4 contractors, and for those 4 contractors to work together to secure the offsite supply chain for the program rather than the individual projects, just in the key work packages. So it's being once people's minds are open to the possibilities, I think they are quite open to it. What we're quite heavy on promoting is that this isn't for everybody. So delivering a £100,000 demolition contract can be done very traditionally in a very agile way, and that's appropriate for it. Alliancing gets real benefits when you're looking at programs of work.
Yeah, certainly. And it just takes those first few brave clients to take that step, doesn't it? And it once you start to demonstrate how those efficiencies have felt, that's when it's gonna take off. That's what we keep saying.
It's a leap of faith, definitely.
Exactly. One last question before we wrap up, and this is a question that we get asked quite a lot, so it'd be interesting to hear what your view is here. So how do you see changes to future trading arrangements impacting who's in the supply chain? Crystal ball.
Oh wow. Impacting our lower tier supply chains, is that?
Yeah, I would suppose so. Yeah.
Yeah. So wow, that is a real crystal ball. Blimey, who can predict what trading arrangements are going to be in place next year?
I feel a bit mean because we ask it all the time.
Yeah, I mean, what we've done through the early days of COVID was we tried to make sure that we were getting out not just into the larger clients, but also into the sort of SME arena, and trying to share with them the access arrangements so that they could effectively subcontract into our supply chain that were on the framework. And we put quite a lot of effort into that. We've got one of our collaborative work streams is how we can drive the SME agenda and try and support that, because it's really recognised that that's where the real fragility is after what's happened this year. So we're trying to do as much as we can to sort of act as that conduit between the two. Yeah. I think it's a real hard question to answer.
It is, I'm sorry, and it's the same with us. It's really dependent on a number of things, but you can only stay as close to it as you can. So we do need to wrap up now because we've got another session at 12 o'clock. But thank you for your time, Noel. That was very interesting. I believe that the slides will be available for us to share.
The slides are available. There's contact details on the back. If you've got any specific questions that arise out of it, please just give me a shout. I'm more than happy to chat.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Noel. Have a great day.
You too. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye.